Had a teacher friend who's going to remain nameless. His teacher friend said to me this week that they cannot wait. In high school, they cannot wait for school to be over. I don't know. I think it has something to do with not the costume. The costumes are out. I think that a lot of juniors and seniors are awful rambunctious the last few days, like loud and obnoxious in the hallways. You all look good. The costumes are good. I yesterday was twins with a 7th grader who had his nice Aurora coat on. I have my coat. I just forgot my battery yesterday. I went to the girls' soccer game and I froze. I took this off. It was very cold last night. Even with the sun out, it was chilly. But anyway, I have to leave today for a doctor's appointment at 3, and I'm going to be leaving here at about 1:55. So, you all at 1:55 are going to scoot up and spend the balance of the class with Mrs. Hanley. I have shared with you, or I will post at some point in the next few minutes, I have shared with you what we're working on in class tomorrow, and I just want you, in the time up in the library, to kind of take a peek at what I've shared with you for tomorrow and look through the PowerPoint and be familiar with that. We're going to have a shortened class tomorrow due to the pep rally schedule. We're going to meet at 10 o'clock in the morning, actually 10:09 to 10:42. They rearranged it. So we'll have a short class, but look at what I shared with you. It's a PowerPoint, and just kind of be familiar with that before tomorrow's class. You will not have a quiz tomorrow. You will not have any quizzing to do tomorrow. Your quizzing and quizzing will be due Monday. So, with that in mind, we left off yesterday talking about the nullification crisis, which is going to be, again, big picture here, packet 1 that we're looking at. We're talking about Jackson's, an overview of his presidency. This will be a biggie, this nullification crisis. We're not going to watch the video. I asked you to watch that last night, and we're going to see another clip on that tomorrow in class. But the nullification crisis basically was the idea that South Carolina didn't want to what? Nullification crisis was South Carolina's decision to what?
Not pay the tariff.
Not just not pay the tariff, but to disobey or to basically throw out laws that they disagree with. Can you imagine living in a society, even today, today especially, what would our country be like if we only obeyed the laws that we wanted to obey, or we only obeyed the laws that we liked? I think the larger issue here with South Carolina and nullification was that they essentially were trying to say that we don't like this law, therefore we should not have to abide by it. Now, that's one approach. I personally think it's the wrong approach. If South Carolina didn't like the law, South Carolina should have taken action to do what? To what? To change the law, all right, rather than just disobey it. So more on the nullification crisis as we get into tomorrow. But essentially, it was South Carolina's attempt to disobey or to basically throw out laws that they disagreed with. All right? Now, with that in mind, let's look at the next overview on the presidency of Mr. Jackson. And we're going to talk briefly again today about the Indian Removal Act. More on this will come next week, or tomorrow in class, or early Monday. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 is going to be signed in 1830, and it's going to forcibly relocate Native Americans to Western territories. Just imagine the following. 1830 comes around, the IRA, the Indian Removal Act, is going to basically force Native Americans to move west across the continent. And this is going to be done to make way for westward expansion of American settlers who are moving westward into Native American territories. This is going to result, and you all recognized this yesterday, it resulted in what will be called the Trail of Tears, which was essentially the movement, the forced movement in the late 1830s of about 17,000 Cherokees from the southeast westward to Oklahoma. Much of the expedition, much of the forced expedition was done in the wintertime. A lot of these people were literally forced to move with nothing but the clothes on their back. many of them old and infirmed and very, very sick. Thousands are going to be buried along the way. The weakest, the youngest, and the oldest, primarily going to be people who died. But this resulted in the Trail of Tears. Again, the Indian Removal Act is significant because it is kind of it's not a symptom, but it's a reflection of President Jackson's treatment and his attitudes toward Native Americans. Jackson was certainly not a friend as president to Native Americans, and the Indian Removal Act, which he signed into law, will certainly be a reflection of his attitude and his temperament toward Native Americans. I do want to watch this video clip, our author's video clip, and tomorrow or Monday, I'll have a more in-depth clip on the Indian Removal Act, including some comments from Cherokee's ancestors and people who were on the march. I've got a video clip that I want to share with you tomorrow or Monday from an ancestor of one of the people talking about what the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears meant to the Cherokee people.
Prior to becoming president, Andrew Jackson established his national reputation primarily as an Indian fighter. He had been a general leading wars against the Indians in Alabama and Tennessee and Mississippi. And once he became president, he was very sympathetic to the appeals of many whites as the American population grew, who wanted to spread into ancestral Indian lands in what was then called the Old Southwest. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. In order to do that, Jackson approved what was called the Indian Removal Act, whereby Congress in 1830 declared that the Indians living in that region of the nation, as well as the rest of the western frontier, were to be relocated to reservations west of the Mississippi River in what is now Oklahoma. It was an incredibly controversial decision. People criticized it, but it still happened, and federal troops forced Native Americans to pick up their belongings and begin walking hundreds of miles west. This walk was often called the Trail of Tears because many thousands of Native Americans, men, women, and children, died along the way. But it symbolized Andrew Jackson's determination to avoid continuing wars with the Native Americans by removing them and thereby allowing whites to move into those lands and take possession of them.
The history of American relations with Native Americans is going to be one of forced removal, betrayal. There's going to be a number of treaties that will be signed with Native American tribes by various presidents that will basically say, if you move here, we'll dedicate, you'll have this dedicated area of land, only to have those treaties be reneged upon or ignored at a later date. So the Trail of Tears is, again, we'll get more into depth on this tomorrow, but I want you to be aware as we're talking moving forward that the Trail of Tears is going to kind of be a reflection of President Jackson's attitudes and his treatment of Native American groups. Indian Removal Act of 1830. Okay? All right. This is going to result, and more on this to come too. We're going to talk about it briefly. This is going to result in a very significant Supreme Court decision. Another, what's called a landmark Supreme Court decision. When we talk about landmark case, we're talking about a case with long-lasting impact. A landmark case, Worcester versus Georgia. And the Supreme Court of the United States, this is one of the reasons that Jackson is despised in Native American circles. Even today, Native American ancestors hold Jackson in a high degree of contempt for this. Supreme Court of the United States basically ruled that the Cherokee people should be sovereign, that the Cherokee people should be able to decide for themselves where they want to live, where they want to raise their families, where they want to stay. All right, and essentially, Worcester versus Georgia was the Cherokees' court decision that will basically result in the Cherokees taking their fight to stay in the American Southeast all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court decision essentially decides, and here's why it's a landmark, it essentially decides that Cherokee sovereignty is legal, and that the Cherokees should not and do not have to be removed forcibly to the west. Now, you might say for a moment, well, if the Supreme Court said that the Cherokees don't have to move, and that the Supreme Court and their rights are being violated, why in the hell does the Trail of Tears end up happening? Well, the reason that it ends up happening is that President Jackson told the Supreme Court and told John Marshall that the Supreme Court made that decision, let him enforce it. Essentially, Jackson, as president, refused to obey the decision of the Supreme Court. Jackson totally ignored, essentially, the Supreme Court's ruling, ignored the Supreme Court's decision, and proceeded with Indian removal. And this is an example. An alarm should go off in your head, and if it's not going off, I'll try to encourage it to go off. This is an example of where the office of the president, the executive branch of government, is going to be in violation of the law. If the Supreme Court is the branch of government that determines whether laws are constitutional or not, and the Supreme Court said that the Cherokees have the right to stay, and President Jackson says we will not enforce that law as the executive branch of government, President Jackson was in direct violation of a constitutional ruling of the Supreme Court. So in that sense, this incident basically asserts, at least temporarily, that the office and the executive branch of government is going to have more sway under Jackson's administration than the Supreme Court or than the Congress. All right? Jackson really did not suffer any consequences for this either. The forced march, the forced removal of Native Americans would proceed despite the Supreme Court ruling. Again, Worcester v. Georgia ruled in favor of the Cherokee. The Supreme Court of the United States said the Cherokee had every right in the world to stay in their native homeland in this American Southeast, and President Jackson essentially thumbed his nose at the decision and said, if John Marshall, who was the Supreme Court Chief Justice, if John Marshall decided that, let him be the one to enforce it. I sure as hell not going to enforce it, Jackson said, as the Chief Executive. Jackson hated that decision, and I think it's pretty obvious that Jackson did not hold Native Americans in high regard either. All right. So Worcester v. Georgia, landmark decision. We'll talk more about it. I got a whole PowerPoint on the Indian Removal Act, which we'll get to further. But just for today, briefly, that's what we got. Jackson's, and again, I hinted at this a little bit ago, Jackson's presidency is going to be characterized by expansion of presidential power. Okay? I mentioned earlier in the year a few times that we go through periods where during one cycle, the executive branch might hold more power than the other two branches. We go through periods where Congress might have more power seemingly than the other two branches. Well, during Jackson's presidency, Jackson expanded the power of the executive branch of government. He used a veto then, this is a wonderful statistic. As the 7th president, President Jackson vetoed more laws, vetoed more bills than any president of the 6 combined before him. So he used the veto power more than all previous presidents combined up to that point. Veto is the president basically refusing to do what? Well, the law's been passed by Congress. A veto is the president refusing to sign it, refusing to sign it into law. So President Jackson, just because Congress passed a bill, in order for a bill to be passed to become law, it's got to pass in the Senate, it's got to pass in the House, and then the president has to sign it. So more than all other 6 presidents combined, the president was presented with a passed bill on his desk by both houses of Congress, and more times than not, he refused to sign it just because he didn't want to sign it. All right. He asserted executive authority in federal state conflicts. Okay, this is another example. He asserted federal authority in federal and state conflicts. He challenged the idea of checks and balances. He didn't like the fact that he was restricted in a lot of ways by the Constitution, which said that the government is going to be a three-branch government, and each branch had the power to check and limit the power of the other two. He was, in a lot of ways, a president who wanted to be more powerful than the Constitution gave him the authority to. He wanted to be more powerful, and he wanted to exercise that authority as the President of the United States. All right? He wanted to exercise that authority. Yes?
Do you know how many times he vetoed like some bills?
I would say in his 8 years as president, he probably vetoed, I'll get an exact number for you, but easily in the hundreds. Easily in the hundreds. I will do a little research for you on that topic, and I'll report back tomorrow, but I would hazard a guess that he vetoed probably hundreds of bills. All right? So, again, big picture. Jackson expanded presidential power. Jackson expanded presidential power by ignoring Worcester v. Georgia, which was, well, let's look at this. I want to make sure you guys got this. Lizzie, go back one slide. Worcester v. Georgia was a decision that was made basically saying the Cherokee could stay. What branch of government is making this decision? The judicial branch is saying that the Cherokee can stay, and the executive branch is saying that they are not going to obey. Okay? So in that sense, the president is really violating the balance of power between the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. We'll watch the video on the power of the president at a later date. Legacy of Jackson's presidency. He transformed the Democratic Party. He expanded executive power. Jackson will be the president most associated with what in voting rights? Who can tell me from yesterday? Jackson will be the president most associated with accomplishing what with respect to voting rights, Palin?
Allowing people that like didn't come from like rich neighborhoods or like rich families to vote, like letting the poor people vote.
What do we call that?
Lowered the standards.
He allows more people to vote. I put a big D word on the board yesterday at the start of class. Democratization. He is going to provide for democratization. More and more people, Palin is absolutely right, more and more people are going to earn suffrage rights, voting rights under Jackson. Jackson, I hate to say this, but he left a controversial and a complex, I don't really hate to say it because I you know, like everybody else, Jackson was a human being. He had his flaws. Anybody that thinks presidents don't have flaws, anybody that thinks that just because people are elected officials, they don't have, wrong answer. We all got flaws, we all got conflicts, we all have seeming contradictions. Jackson left a complex and controversial legacy. I could easily pat Jackson on the back as a student of history and say, you know, great job, more and more people were able to vote. But at the same time you're patting him on the back, you're also fair to criticize him for his treatment of Native Americans and his treatment of African Americans, clearly. All right? We'll talk about this question later in the week. And we've got Jackson and a picture of the $20 bill there. He is, as I mentioned, on the $20 bill. And there's been a move afoot in the last 10 or 15 years to remove him. Harriet Tubman's been mentioned as a potential replacement. There's been other figures. If Jackson is removed, from the $20 bill, first of all, he'll never be off the $20 bill because there always will be $20 bills in circulation that have his picture. But if a new person is added to new $20 bills, I can almost guarantee you it will be a person from one of the two groups that were most affected by Jackson's presidency, and that will probably be either an abolitionist or an African American or a Native American. If he is removed from the new $20 bill, it will be one of those groups that will garner the face of the $20 bill. To kind of just point out that he was not a friend president. He was not a friendly president to Native American groups or African American on that note, I'm gonna ask you guys to, can everybody do me a favor? Can you stack the Chromebooks on this corner desk? And can you guys all put up a couple chairs for me? Please?